My parents and brother conspired to move him into my inherited mountain cabin after I refused. When I arrived for a peaceful weekend, I found a moving truck in my driveway and his pregnant wife setting up a nursery. I called the sheriff without hesitation. "I'm Mark. I'm 32. And I had to call the sheriff on my own parents and brother after I found them moving into the mountain cabin my grandfather left me. Before I tell you about the undeniable, game-changing proof I had on my phone that shut my father's mouth for good, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It always helps to know who I'm talking to. It all started with the promise of silence, the kind of deep, soul-settling quiet you can only find under a blanket of stars. Miles away from the nearest highway, that's what the cabin represented for me. It wasn't just a building. It was a legacy cast in timber and stone, perched on a mountainside that held 40 years of my family's best memories. My grandfather, a man whose quiet strength was his trademark, built it with his own 2 hands. When he passed away 3 years ago, he left it to me in his will. Not to the family. To me, it was the most significant inheritance I could ever imagine. A direct link to the man I admired most and my one true escape from the relentless grind of my life in the city. That particular Friday, my soul was crying out for that escape. The week had been a gauntlet of back-to-back meetings, a project that had gone off the rails, and the constant, buzzing pressure of corporate life. My shoulders were tight, my head was pounding, and all I could picture was that 2-hour drive, watching the concrete jungle recede in my rearview mirror as I climbed higher into the mountains. I pictured the moment perfectly. Sitting on the wide wooden deck, a cold beer sweating in my hand, the setting sun bleeding purple and orange across the peaks. The only sound would be the wind rustling through the aspen leaves, a sound my grandfather used to call mountain music. That's the peace I was chasing. As I turned my truck off the main road and onto the familiar gravel path, a sliver of that peace began to settle in. The dust kicking up behind me felt like washing away the city grime. I rounded the final, pine-lined bend, my eyes searching for the first glimpse of the cabin's iconic A-frame roof. And then I saw it, and the world tilted on its axis. The cabin was there, solid and beautiful as ever, but my driveway, my private slice of mountain solitude, looked like a chaotic staging area for an invasion. My parents' aging Buick was parked carelessly askew. My brother Eric's beat-up, rust-colored pickup was next to it, and hulking behind them both, like a giant yellow beast of bad news, was a moving van. My heart didn't just drop. It plummeted. A cold, metallic taste filled my mouth. This couldn't be happening. I killed the engine and the sudden silence was deafening, amplifying the frantic thumping in my chest. I got out, the slam of my truck door sounding like a gunshot in the quiet air. The front door to my cabin was propped wide open. I walked towards it, each step heavier than the last, a storm of confusion and dread brewing inside me. The scene inside was one of surreal horror. Boxes bearing unfamiliar handwriting were stacked in the living room. My father, Robert, stood with his hands on his hips, barking orders at 2 weary-looking movers who were struggling to maneuver a hideous floral print sofa I'd never seen in my life. "No, pivot it," he commanded, his voice echoing with unearned authority. "It has to be centered on the hearth." My mother, Linda, was in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune as she unpacked a set of garish ceramic plates into the very cabinets my grandfather had built. And in the second bedroom, my guest room, was Eric's pregnant girlfriend, Jessica. She was holding up a string of pastel-colored animal decals against the wall, laughing as she planned a nursery. In my home, they all turned as I stepped over the threshold, a ghost at my own feast. My mother's smile was painfully bright. "Mark, what a surprise. We were going to call you once we got everything settled." My gaze swept from the ugly sofa to the foreign boxes, to Jessica's swollen belly. My voice came out as a low, dangerous whisper. "What is all this?" My father clapped his hands together, a broad, smug grin spreading across his face. He strode over and draped a heavy arm over my shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of affection. It was a power move, a physical declaration of dominance. "We made an executive decision as your parents," he announced, his voice booming as if addressing a crowd. "This cabin is family property. Your brother needs it more than you do. It's time you learn to share, son." I stared at him, the words ringing in my ears, so full of arrogance they were almost nonsensical. He wasn't asking. He was informing me of a verdict I had no say in. They had plotted, conspired, and were now executing a full-scale takeover of my life's one true sanctuary. I instinctively stepped back, shrugging off his hand. A thick, challenging silence descended. My father's grin didn't falter. He truly believed he was in the right. He believed I would protest, then complain, and then, as I had so many times before, simply give in. He was wrong. Dead wrong. Slowly, deliberately, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The simple action seemed to suck the air out of the room. My mother's humming had stopped. My father's grin tightened at the edges. I didn't navigate to my recent calls. I tapped open a folder on my home screen, a folder I had created for this very purpose, hoping I'd never have to use it. It was labeled, simply, Evidence. The evidence folder on my phone was a grim testament to the fact that this invasion wasn't a spontaneous act. It was the logical conclusion of a campaign that had been waged against my boundaries for months. A slow drip of disrespect that had finally eroded my trust completely. To really get it, you have to understand the landscape of my family. I was the responsible son. The one who got the degree, moved to the city, and climbed the corporate ladder. I was stable, independent, and, in their eyes, distant. Then there was my younger brother, Eric. The golden child. The project that never quite launched. Eric was a master of failing upwards, always cushioned by my parents' endless supply of excuses and financial bailouts. He'd coasted through life on a wave of, he's just finding his passion. And the world is tough on young people. Meanwhile, my accomplishments were viewed with a strange mix of pride and resentment. My demanding job meant I was neglecting them. My financial independence meant I didn't need them. I was a success, but I was a selfish success. And the cabin, my grandfather's legacy to me, became the ultimate symbol of that selfishness. In their narrative, I was a dragon hoarding a treasure that rightfully belonged to the entire kingdom. The first tremor of the earthquake to come happened about 3 months prior. It was a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, an obligatory ritual. I'd gone into the kitchen to get a beer from the fridge when I heard my father's low, rumbling voice from the adjacent living room. He was talking to Eric, who had been complaining about the cramped apartment he shared with Jessica. "Here," my dad said. A faint, metallic jingle followed his words, a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "It's the spare key to the cabin. Your mother and I had a copy made ages ago for emergencies. Figured it was good to have one in the family." My hand froze on the refrigerator door. A spare key? This was the first I was hearing of it. An emergency key they never thought to mention to the actual owner. "Don't make a big deal about it with Mark," my father continued, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone I knew all too well. "You know how he gets. Thinks he's the king of that mountain. But you should feel free to use it. Take Jessica up for a weekend. Place like that should be enjoyed. It's a family place, son. Remember that." I stood there, concealed by the doorframe, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm. The casual deception was stunning. He wasn't just giving my brother a key. He was giving him a narrative in which I was the unreasonable gatekeeper of a communal property. I waited a few minutes, composed myself, and walked back into the living room. They were watching a football game, laughing at a commercial. The picture of innocence. Couldn't let it go. I called my dad 2 days later, determined to handle it like a calm, rational adult. "Hey Dad," I started, keeping my voice even. "I think I overheard you talking to Eric about a spare key to the cabin. I'm really not comfortable with that. I need to be the only one with access." His response was a masterclass in gaslighting. "A key? Mark, you must have misheard. I was just telling him we should get a spare made for you in case you lost yours. You're always so busy. You could lose your head if it wasn't attached." "No, Dad. I'm certain I heard you say you already had one and gave it to him. You're being overly sensitive." He sighed, his tone shifting to one of weary patience, as if dealing with a difficult child. "It's for your own good, for the family's good. What if there was a pipe burst or a fire? We need to be able to get in. Then you would call me and I would drive up." I insisted, my grip tightening on the phone. "That's how it works. It's my property. Grandpa entrusted it to me. I need you to get that key back from Eric. All right, we'll talk about it later," he said dismissively, immediately changing the subject. "Did you see the property tax assessment on my house? It's criminal." And just like that, the conversation was over. He had stonewalled me. He had decided. That conversation was the spark. A cold, hard suspicion began to crystallize in my mind. This wasn't just about a key. It was about control. It was about their refusal to see me as an adult with rights they were bound to respect. That night, unable to sleep, I sat in the dark of my city apartment and logged into my account for the cabin's internet service. I was the one who paid the bill after all. With a churning stomach, I navigated to the admin panel, the section that showed all connected devices, and there it was in black and white, a list: my MacBook Pro, my iPhone, and then two others, Eric's iPhone and Jessica's Galaxy S21. The logs were detailed and damning. They showed multiple connections over the past 2 months, always on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, when they knew I was 100 miles away, chained to a desk. The air left my lungs. They had been sneaking up there, using my home, my water, my electricity, my Wi-Fi, treating my sanctuary like a free motel. Then, another memory surfaced, hitting me with the force of a physical blow. About a month before, I'd gone up for a weekend. While I was cleaning, I found a small, bright pink plastic hair clip tucked deep in the cushions of the armchair by the fireplace. I had been mystified at the time. I didn't have kids. None of my recent guests did. I tossed it in a drawer, thinking it must have been there for ages. But now I knew. Jessica's daughter, Emma, was 3 years old. I'd seen her wearing clips just like it. The pieces weren't just clicking into place anymore. They were slamming together, forming an ugly, irrefutable mosaic of deceit. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This felt like a coordinated, strategic campaign to undermine my ownership. I needed an ally. I needed someone outside the family bubble who wouldn't tell me I was being too sensitive. I called David, my best friend from college. He'd had a front row seat to my family's unique brand of dysfunction for over a decade. "You are not going to believe what I just found out," I said, and the whole story came pouring out. The key, the gaslighting, the Wi-Fi logs, the pink beret. David listened without interrupting. When I finally ran out of steam, he let out a long, low whistle. "Wow, Mark, just wow. I wish I could say I'm surprised. But I'm not. This has been their pattern forever. Eric is the prince, and you're the guy who's supposed to fund the kingdom. But what do I do, Dave?" I asked, the frustration making my voice raw. "How do I fight this?" "Look, man, you're past the point of having a reasonable conversation with them," he said, his voice firm and serious. "They've shown you they won't listen to reason. They only understand consequences. You have to stop thinking like a son and start thinking like a property owner. Document everything. Every phone call, every login. Create a paper trail. You need to protect yourself, and I mean legally." He was right. The hope for a family reconciliation was a fantasy. This was a property dispute. I was dealing with tenants who had never signed a lease and believed they owned the building. That's the night the evidence folder was born. I took meticulously dated screenshots of the Wi-Fi logs. I wrote a detailed account of my conversation with my dad, quoting his evasions verbatim. I took a picture of the pink beret. Felt cold, calculated, and deeply sad. I was building a case against my own parents. I decided to make one final attempt at a direct conversation, a clear, unambiguous statement of my boundaries. I would do it at the next Sunday dinner. I held on to one last, foolish shred of hope that a face-to-face confrontation, a clear and forceful no, would be enough to make them see the light. That shred of hope was about to be shredded, stomped on, and set on fire. The following Sunday, I drove to my parents' house feeling like a diplomat heading to a failed peace summit. The knot of dread in my gut was a familiar companion. The smell of my mother's cooking, usually a scent of comfort, now smelled like bait in a trap. I was walking into their territory, but I was armed with a simple, powerful word: no. I just had to have the courage to use it. The second I stepped inside, I knew this wasn't going to be a normal dinner. The air was charged with a strange, performative gravity. Eric was already there, sitting on the sofa with Jessica pasted to his side. She was holding her 3-year-old daughter, Emma, on her lap. The child's presence felt like a deliberate tactical move. A small, innocent shield designed to make me look like a monster if I didn't capitulate. "Mark, honey, come in, come in." My mother, Linda, called from the kitchen, wiping her hands on an apron. Her smile was stretched so tight it looked painful. Her eyes darted around nervously. It was her "we're all a happy family" mask, the one she wore when a storm was brewing. My father, Robert, stood by the fireplace, his arms crossed, looking stern and important. "Son, sit down. We need to have a talk." A family meeting. Family meeting was their term for a tribunal where my role was to listen and agree. I took the lone armchair across from the sofa. Feeling the full weight of their combined stare, the trial had begun. My father cleared his throat with dramatic effect and picked up a small stack of papers from the mantelpiece. "Your mother and I have been thinking a great deal about the future, about legacy, about what is fair and right for this family, and it all comes back to the cabin." He held the papers up as if they were a sacred text. Even from across the room, I could see the document was unprofessionally typed, the formatting slightly askew. "We've had this drawn up," he announced, his voice filled with self-importance. "It's a family agreement. It formalizes a path forward that benefits everyone and keeps the family legacy intact." He walked over and handed it to me. My hand was surprisingly steady as I took it. The title was in a bold, oversized font: "Family Cabin Usage and Heritage Agreement." It looked like something he'd designed himself after watching a single episode of a daytime court show. My eyes scanned the document. It was a masterpiece of delusional entitlement. It was filled with nonsensical phrases like equitable heritage distribution, familial asset stewardship, and the moral obligations of the primary legatee. It was a word salad of self-justification, but the core of it was brutally simple. Clause 1 stated that Eric and his burgeoning family would be granted exclusive residential rights to the cabin, rent-free, for an indefinite term. Clause 2 stipulated that my own use of the property would be limited to a maximum of 4 pre-approved weekends per year, subject to a 30-day written request and Eric's approval. Clause 3 declared that in exchange for my cooperation, I would be fulfilling my duty and ensuring ongoing family harmony. I felt a cold, sharp laugh bubble up inside me, but I swallowed it down. This document wasn't just insulting. It was a declaration that they saw me not as a son, but as a resource to be managed. I slowly lowered the papers and looked up, letting my gaze travel across their expectant faces. My father puffed up with patriarchal certainty. My mother, her eyes already welling up with strategic tears. Eric, a smug little smirk playing on his lips. Jessica, staring at the floor, the picture of humble desperation. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. The silence in the room was absolute. My father's face, which had been so self-satisfied, began to contort with disbelief. What did you just say?" I said no. I repeated, my voice firmer this time. I placed the ridiculous papers on the coffee table as if they were contaminated. "I am not signing this. This is not a discussion. The cabin is mine. It is not a community asset. This conversation is over. And cue the waterworks." My mother's face crumpled, and she buried it in her hands, her shoulders beginning to shake with loud, performative sobs. "I just don't understand why you have to be so cruel, Mark." She wailed into her palms. "Why must you always choose things over people, over your own family? This is tearing our family apart. Don't you have a heart? Your brother, his pregnant girlfriend. They need a safe place for their baby, and you're just hoarding that big, empty house." The performance was breathtaking. The guilt was laid on so thick I could have scraped it off with a knife. Jessica, on cue, hugged her daughter tighter, looking up at me with wide, wounded eyes. Eric put a protective arm around her, glaring at me. The tableau was complete. Mark, the heartless villain, had had enough. I stood up. "I'm not hoarding anything. I'm protecting what is legally and morally mine, and I will not be emotionally blackmailed. I'm done." I turned and walked to the door, my mother's sobs escalating behind me. "You're breaking your mother's heart, Mark. You're tearing this family to pieces." I walked out into the cool night air, my whole body trembling with a toxic mix of rage and adrenaline. I got into my truck, stabbing the key into the ignition. Before I could even turn it, my phone buzzed. The caller ID read, "Aunt Susan, my dad's sister." My gut clenched, but a tiny, stupid part of me thought, maybe she'll be the voice of reason. I was a fool. "Mark," she began without preamble, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Your father just called me, and I have to say, I am deeply disappointed in you. Aunt Susan, you're only getting one side of the story." I tried to interject. "I'm getting the side where a son is disrespecting his parents and turning his back on his own brother in his time of need." She snapped. "What has gotten into you? That cabin has always been a place for the whole family. Your grandfather would be rolling in his grave to see you acting like this. So high and mighty. Your mother is inconsolable. You were raised better than this." Her words felt like stones being thrown at me. She was just parroting their script, their twisted narrative. I realized with a sickening lurch that the family meeting wasn't the opening move. It was part of a much larger, coordinated campaign to isolate and pressure me. "You don't understand," I said, my voice hollow. "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said coldly. "I understand you've let success go to your head, and you've forgotten where you come from. You should be ashamed of yourself." She hung up. I stared at the black screen. The feeling of betrayal was so profound it was almost physical. A cold weight pressing on my chest. It wasn't just them anymore. They had turned the family against me. I was an island. As I sat there, stunned, the front door of the house flew open and Eric stormed out. He wrenched open the passenger door of my truck and slid in, his face red and blotchy with anger. "What the hell is your problem?" He spat, his voice shaking. "Get out of my truck, Eric. Not until you get this through your thick skull," he said, jabbing a finger toward my face. "Jessica is pregnant. Pregnant. We need that cabin. Mom and Dad promised it to us. It was their gift for the baby. Based on that promise, we already gave our 30-day notice to our landlord. We're going to be out on the street because of you." The final piece clicked into place. They had intentionally created this crisis. They had made a promise with my property, pushed Eric to burn his bridges, and engineered this entire situation so that I would be forced to either give in or look like the villain who made a pregnant woman homeless. It was a perfectly constructed trap. "Your poor planning is not my emergency, Eric," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "A promise made with something that doesn't belong to them is worthless. You of all people should know better than to count on a handout. So that's it. You're just going to watch us end up on the street," he yelled, his voice cracking with panicked disbelief. "I'm not doing a single thing to you, Eric," I said, finally turning to meet his gaze, letting him see the absolute absence of compromise in my eyes. "I'm simply preventing you from taking what belongs to me. There's a very big difference. Now, for the last time, get out." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He was searching for the old Mark, the one who would eventually sigh and give in to keep the peace. He didn't find him. With a cry of frustration, he got out and slammed the door so hard the entire truck frame shuddered. As I pulled away from the curb, a cold, hard certainty settled over me. The last flicker of hope for a peaceful, reasonable outcome had been extinguished. They had shown me exactly who they were. There was no family to save here. There was only a war to be won. The week that followed was defined by a deafening silence. The daily check-in texts from my mom, the calls from my dad about some trivial issue with his lawnmower. All of it stopped. It was a calculated silence. A strategic withdrawal designed to make me feel the full weight of their disapproval. They were waiting for me to break, to call them with my tail between my legs, ready to beg for forgiveness and sign their insane agreement. They misjudged me completely. The events of that Sunday hadn't broken me. They had forged me into something new. The phone call with Aunt Susan had been the final, clarifying blow. It had cauterized any lingering feelings of familial obligation. My goal was no longer to make them understand. My goal was to protect myself from them. I didn't spend the week wallowing in anxiety. I spent it in focused, methodical preparation. The evidence folder became my war room. The anger and hurt were still there, simmering beneath the surface, but I channeled them into action. It was time to build my fortress. I spent one entire evening at my desk, transforming my digital evidence into a hard copy arsenal. I started with the county clerk's website. With a few clicks and a small fee on my credit card, I had a freshly certified copy of the property deed for the cabin. Seeing my name, Mark Peterson, as the sole owner in official, notarized print felt like holding a shield. Next, I opened the digital copy of my grandfather's will that my lawyer had sent me years ago. I found the specific article, highlighted it, and printed it in high quality. To my grandson, Mark Peterson, I bequeath my mountain cabin and all its contents, with my deepest trust that he will care for it as I have. Reading those words from the man I respected most in the world felt like a direct endorsement, a blessing on the battle I was about to fight. Then came the digital footprints, the Wi-Fi logs. I printed every single page, taking a yellow highlighter to the entries for Eric's iPhone and Jessica's Galaxy S21. The dates, the times, the duration of their connections. It was a clear, undeniable pattern of trespassing, a secret history of their entitlement. I wasn't just relying on what I had either. I spent an hour on my state's government website, reading the statutes on criminal trespass and property rights. I wanted to know my rights, not just morally but legally, down to the letter of the law. I printed out the relevant sections, highlighting the parts about unauthorized habitation and the process for having unwanted individuals removed by law enforcement. Finally, with the legal statutes in front of me, I drafted my own document. It was a formal trespass warning, worded clearly and without emotion. It named Robert Peterson, Linda Peterson, Eric Peterson, and Jessica Miller, and stated that they were formally forbidden from entering the property at 125 Aspen Ridge Road. It concluded by stating that any violation of the notice would result in immediate law enforcement action. I left the signature and date lines blank, ready for the moment I would need it. I slid each document, the deed, the will, the logs, the legal statutes, the warning, into its own clear plastic sheet protector. I organized them all in a crisp manila folder. It felt like assembling a weapon. Each piece of paper another round of ammunition. On Thursday afternoon, right in the middle of this grim work, my work phone buzzed. An email notification popped up on my screen. The subject was short and to the point. Project Titan follow-up. It was from David Sterling, the CEO of my company. My heart skipped a beat. An email from the CEO was usually a big deal. I opened it, my mind still half on property law. Mark, it began. Just a quick note to say thank you again for your incredible leadership on the Titan launch. You took a project that was behind schedule and over budget and turned it into a major win for the company. The client is ecstatic. The board is impressed. Your professionalism under pressure is a rare and valuable asset to this firm. As a reflection of that, we've processed a significant Q2 performance bonus for you, which you'll see in your next pay cycle. More importantly, I wanted you to know that your work has not gone unnoticed. You've proven yourself to be a leader. Well done. Best, David Sterling. I leaned back in my chair, the email glowing on the screen. I read it once, then twice. The contrast was staggering. In one part of my life, my family was actively plotting against me, viewing me as selfish, difficult, an obstacle to be overcome. And in the other, the CEO of my company was calling me a leader, a professional, a valuable asset. It was more than just a confidence boost. It was a mirror showing me who I truly was, versus the distorted reflection my family tried to force on me. They saw my dedication as a flaw. Mr. Sterling saw it as a virtue. They saw my boundaries as selfishness. He saw my leadership as an asset. That email became the final, most important piece of my armor. It wasn't about the money. It was a powerful, external validation of my identity. I was not the problem child they painted me as. I was a competent, respected professional. I was the man my grandfather had trusted with his legacy. With that newfound clarity, I remembered one last thing. A few weeks ago, my dad had called me late on a Saturday night. I'd been out, so I didn't answer. He'd left a rambling voicemail that I'd ignored at the time. I scrolled through my phone, my thumb hovering over the deleted folder. I found it and pressed play. His voice, slurred with alcohol, filled my ear. Marky, hey son, it's your dad. Just out with some old friends. Hey, listen. There was a muffled sound, like he was talking to someone next to him. Yeah, I'm leaving a message. No, he never answers. He chuckled. then turned back to the phone. "Listen, son, don't you worry about your brother. We got a plan. We're gonna get that cabin for Eric one way or another. A man's gotta provide for his family, right? It's the right thing to do. We'll make it right." My blood ran cold. I hit save voicemail immediately. There it was. Confession. Undeniable proof of his premeditated intent. Delivered in his own arrogant, drunken words. The folder on my desk no longer felt like a weapon. Felt like a shield of truth. And I was ready to use it. The coming weekend wasn't just a trip to the mountains. It was a reckoning. The 2-hour drive to the cabin on Friday was different from any I'd ever taken. The usual sense of peace I felt when the city gave way to the mountains was replaced by a cold, laser-like focus. This wasn't an escape. This was a mission. My manila folder, my shield of truth, sat on the passenger seat beside me. It felt heavy with the gravity of what was to come. I wasn't hoping to win an argument. I was prepared to end a war. Rounding that final familiar bend in the gravel road and seeing the moving van felt less like a shock and more like a grim final confirmation. They had actually gone through with it. They had crossed a line from which there was no return. Their arrogance was so profound. They never once considered I would fight back. I maneuvered my truck, parking it directly behind the large moving van, blocking its exit completely. It was a small, deliberate act of control. I took the folder, took one deep, steadying breath, and walked toward the open front door of my home. The scene inside was a surreal violation of everything the cabin stood for. My father, Robert, was directing the two movers with the air of a Roman emperor. My mother, Linda, was in the kitchen, cheerfully putting her mismatched plates into my grandfather's handcrafted cabinets. And in the guest room, Jessica was holding up a baby onesie, discussing paint colors with my brother, Eric. They were nesting in my nest. They were so absorbed in their triumphant takeover that they didn't notice me until I was standing right in the entryway. "Mark," my mother exclaimed, her voice a little too high, her smile a little too bright. "We were just talking about you." I didn't smile back. I let my gaze drift over the ugly furniture, the piles of their belongings, the desecration of my sanctuary. I looked at each of them one by one, letting the silence stretch. "What is all of this?" I finally asked. My voice was quiet, dangerously devoid of the anger churning in my gut. That quietness seemed to unnerve them more than shouting ever could. My father, ever the spokesman, puffed out his chest and strode toward me. He clapped me on the shoulder in a gesture of false bonhomie. "Son, we made an executive decision. As your parents," he boomed, delivering the line he'd clearly been rehearsing. "It's time you learned to share. This is a family cabin, and right now your brother's family needs it more than you do." I just stared at him. I looked past his smug face to the two movers, who had stopped working and were now watching the show with the keen interest of bystanders at a car crash. "You have 1 minute," I said, my voice as cold and hard as granite. 1 minute to get your people and your things out of my house and off my property." My father actually laughed. A short, sharp, disbelieving bark. "Don't be ridiculous, Mark. You're the one who's going to have to leave. This is Eric's home now. Don't make a scene." "I'm not the one making a scene," I said evenly. "You are, and your minute is ticking away." That's when I pulled out my phone. A flicker of uncertainty finally crossed my mother's face. "What are you doing, Mark?" "I'm calling the sheriff," I said, and without another word, I dialed the number for the county department. My father's face transformed from smugness to a deep, mottled purple. "You wouldn't. You don't call the law on your own family. That's not how we handle things. You gave up your right to be handled like family the moment you decided to commit a felony," I retorted as the dispatcher's voice came on the line. I calmly gave my name, my address, and stated that I was the legal owner of a property that several individuals were trespassing on and refusing to leave. The dispatcher said a deputy would be there as soon as possible. The 15 minutes we waited for that patrol car felt like an eternity. The atmosphere in the cabin was thick enough to choke on. My mother had collapsed onto one of her ugly new armchairs, her face buried in her hands, her earlier bravado replaced by panicked sobs. Eric had emerged from the back room, looking pale and uncertain. Jessica, however, had found her courage. She had her phone out and was recording me. A vicious sneer on her face. "Everyone's going to see what a cold-hearted monster you are," she hissed. Throwing a pregnant woman out of her home. I ignored her completely. I stood my ground by the door, my arms crossed, the manila folder clutched in my hand. I was a statue of defiance. Finally, the crunch of tires on gravel announced the arrival of the law. A county sheriff's patrol car pulled in behind my truck. A large man with a thick gray mustache and the weary eyes of someone who'd seen it all stepped out. His name tag read Sheriff Miller. He was a face I recognized from around town. "All right, folks," he said, his gaze taking in the whole strange scene. The moving van, the tense group of people, me standing like a sentinel at the door. "Can someone tell me what's going on here?" My father, seeing the badge, immediately shifted into his role as the reasonable, concerned patriarch being victimized by his wayward son. "Sheriff, thank God you're here. It's just a family misunderstanding, that's all. This is my son, Mark," he said, gesturing at me with a mix of pity and contempt. "He's being a little possessive with the family cabin. We were just moving my other son, Eric, in. His girlfriend here is pregnant. They need a stable place." Sheriff Miller's gaze shifted to me. It was a neutral, assessing look. "Son, is this your property?" "Yes, sir, it is," I said clearly. "It was willed to me and only me by my late grandfather. I have the notarized deed right here." I opened my folder and handed him the first plastic sleeve document. He took it, his eyes scanning the official print. My father let out a scoff. "That's just a piece of paper. We are his parents. That gives us certain rights. We are trying to do what is best for the entire family." The sheriff looked from the deed in his hand to my father, then back to me. I could see the internal debate in his eyes. He was a small-town sheriff who probably dealt with property line disputes and barking dogs. Not this level of intense family warfare. He was looking for the easy way out, a way to tell us all to cool down and work it out amongst ourselves. This was the moment of truth. There was no CEO driving by. There was no lucky coincidence. There was only me, my preparation, and the truth. "Sheriff," I said, my voice ringing with a confidence I didn't know I had. "My father is wrong. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a calculated attempt to illegally seize my property." I handed him the next document. "This is a copy of my grandfather's will, Article 4, Section B. It's quite clear." He read it. My father started to bluster again about family loyalty. I handed over the Wi-Fi logs. "And this is proof that they have been knowingly and repeatedly trespassing on my property for the last 3 months. The sheriff's eyebrows climbed up his forehead as he flipped through the pages. He shot a sharp look at Eric, who suddenly found the floor fascinating. Jessica lowered her phone slightly. "But the most important thing," I said, my voice dropping as I took out my phone, "the thing that proves this was not a misunderstanding, but a premeditated act, is this." I found the saved voicemail. I turned the volume on my phone all the way up. I hit play. My own father's drunken, boastful voice filled the cabin, bouncing off the wooden walls my grandfather had so carefully built. "Marky, hey, it's your dad. Listen, son, don't you worry about your brother. We got a plan. We're gonna get that cabin for Eric one way or another. A man's gotta provide for his family, right? It's the right thing to do. We'll make it right." The voicemail ended. The silence it left behind was absolute and damning. My father stared at the phone in my hand as if it were a snake. His mouth was open, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, gray mask of shock. He had been convicted by his own words. Sheriff Miller looked from my speechless father to me. The weariness was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by a hard, professional certainty. He straightened up to his full height and turned to face my father. His voice was no longer that of a mediator. It was the voice of the law. "Robert," he said, his tone like ice, "you and everyone with you have 2 choices. You can pack up every single thing you brought onto this property and leave immediately. Or, I can place you, your wife, your son, and his girlfriend under arrest for criminal trespass and conspiracy to commit the same. It's your call. You have 5 minutes to decide." The fight was over. Their elaborate web of manipulation, entitlement, and emotional blackmail had been utterly destroyed by the simple, cold, hard light of the truth. A truth I had fought to bring to light all by myself. The change in the room was instantaneous and absolute. It was like a switch had been flipped. My father's righteous indignation collapsed into a heap of slack-jawed, ashen-faced shock. He looked like a man who had just been publicly stripped naked. My mother's dramatic sobs, which she had started to ramp up again when the sheriff arrived, sputtered out into quiet, pathetic whimpers. The reality of the situation, the flashing lights of a patrol car, the threat of actual arrest, had finally pierced her bubble of maternal privilege. Sheriff Miller stood by the door, a silent, imposing figure, his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't need to say another word. His presence was enough. The two movers, who had been watching the entire drama unfold with the rapt attention of a theater audience, exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible nod, with a professionalism that stood in stark contrast to my family's chaos. They immediately went back to work, this time hauling the ugly floral sofa back out the door and toward the moving van. Eric refused to meet my eyes. His face was a pale, sweaty mask of fear and resentment. He started grabbing boxes, his movements jerky and angry, slamming them down with petulant force. He wasn't angry at his parents for putting him in this position. He was angry at me for not letting them get away with it. Jessica finally put her phone away. The sneer of the would-be social media warrior was gone, replaced by a wide-eyed panic. She grabbed her daughter Emma's hand and began frantically stuffing baby clothes and toys into a diaper bag. Her dream of a rent-free mountain paradise, a gift she felt entitled to, was dissolving into a nightmare of public humiliation. My father finally regained a sliver of his voice, but it was a weak, reedy thing, stripped of all its former power. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his last pathetic attempt at asserting authority. "You'll regret this, Mark," he rasped. "You are no son of mine. After today, you are dead to me." "I can live with that," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. The threat of being disowned, a weapon he had held over my head my entire life, was now just an empty noise. "You can't be fired from a job you've already decided to quit." As they all began their walk of shame out of my cabin, my mother paused at the doorway. She reached out a trembling hand, as if to touch my arm. Her face was a wreck of smeared makeup and genuine confusion. "Mark, how could you do this to us?" she whispered. "To your own family." I looked directly into her eyes, the source of a lifetime of emotional manipulation and guilt. I saw not a mother, but a strategist whose final gambit had failed. "Mom," I said, my voice low and clear, for her ears only, "the guilt trips are over. The tears don't work on me anymore. None of it does. This is finished." She flinched as if my words were a physical blow. She snatched her hand back, turned, and hurried out the door after her husband, a general retreating from a lost battle. As they were loading the last of their things, Eric stomped over to me one last time. "Are you happy now?" he snarled. "You got what you wanted. You tore our whole family apart over a stupid house." "No, Eric," I said calmly. "You and Mom and Dad tore this family apart when you decided I didn't matter. The house was just where it happened. Now get off my property." He glared at me, speechless, then spun around and climbed into his truck, slamming the door. I stood on the porch and watched them leave, a sad, pathetic caravan of defeat, kicking up dust as they disappeared down the road. The movers finished their work, and the lead man came over to me. He was a big guy with tattooed arms and a surprisingly kind face. "Here's your copy of the invoice, sir," he said, handing me a slip of paper. "For what it's worth. Good on you for standing your ground." He gave me a small, respectful nod, and then they too were gone. A profound silence descended upon the cabin. It was a heavy, complicated silence, thick with the residue of the ugly confrontation, but beneath the weight of it, I could feel the first, tentative stirrings of genuine peace. I didn't wait. My resolve was a hot fire now. The first call was to a 24-hour locksmith in the next town over. "I need every lock changed, as soon as possible," I said. The second call was to a home security company. "I want the works," I told the salesman. "Cameras, motion sensors, glass break detectors, everything you've got." My sanctuary was becoming a fortress, and I felt no regret. While I waited, I began the process of reclaiming my space. I found a few boxes they'd left behind in their haste. I didn't even look inside. I hauled them out to the driveway and left them by the trash cans for garbage pickup. I walked through the entire cabin, opening every single window, letting the clean, cool mountain air rush in and purge the stale scent of their presence. As I was sweeping the floor, my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then answered, putting it on speaker. "Hello, Mark, it's your mother." Her voice was raspy, exhausted. "Your father is a mess. I've never seen him like this. You humiliated him, Mark. All we were trying to do was help your brother have a good start in life." The complete, unshakable lack of self-awareness was almost impressive. "You were trying to steal my house, Mom," I said, my voice tired. "Let's just call it what it is." "Oh, it's always about things with you, isn't it? It's just a house. Family is more important than bricks and mortar. You need to call your father and apologize. You need to fix this. Let Eric have the cabin. It's the only way." I stopped sweeping. I leaned against the doorframe, looking out at the vast expanse of mountains, the peaks sharp against the darkening sky. "No," I said simply. "No," she repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "No, I will not apologize for protecting myself. I will not fix a problem I didn't create. The locksmith is on his way. My lawyer will be sending you, Dad, Eric and Jessica official, notarized trespass warnings via certified mail tomorrow. If any of you set foot on this property again, I will have you arrested. Is that absolutely crystal clear?" There was a choked, strangled sound on the other end, and then the line went dead. I ended the call and set the phone down. I felt a pang of grief, a brief, sharp mourning for the family I wished I had, the family I would never have. But that grief was quickly consumed by an overwhelming, tidal wave of relief. The final chain had been broken. The lifelong cycle of guilt, obligation, and manipulation was over. I had lost a family, but in doing so, I had finally truly claimed my own life. The 6 months that followed were a study in the profound, healing power of silence. The winter snows fell, blanketing the mountains and my life in a quiet, pristine layer of white. The certified letters from my lawyer, formal and severe, had clearly hit their mark. There were no more angry phone calls, no tearful voicemails, no surprise visits from relatives enlisted in my parents' smear campaign. It was as if a chronic, painful inflammation in my life had finally subsided. The initial soreness of the break gave way to a growing sense of lightness, of health. The fortress I had built around the cabin slowly transformed back into a sanctuary. The high-tech security system, with its cameras and sensors, became a silent, watchful guardian. For the first few weeks, I found myself checking the live feed on my phone obsessively, a lingering paranoia from the invasion. But as the peaceful weeks turned into peaceful months, I began to forget it was even there. The cabin was mine again, not a battleground, but a haven. My life in the city found a new, more vibrant rhythm, freed from the constant low-level hum of family drama that had been the soundtrack to my life for so long. I discovered I had more energy, more creativity, more focus. My work at the tech firm thrived. I took on new projects not out of a need to prove myself, but out of genuine passion. And I started dating, really dating for the first time in a long while. Her name was Anna. She was an architect, a woman who designed strong, beautiful, functional spaces for a living. Felt fitting. She was whip-smart, with a quick laugh and a sense of self-possessed calm that I found incredibly attractive. She had her own life, her own ambitions. When I eventually told her the story of what had happened with my family, starting vaguely at first, then filling in the details as my trust in her grew, she didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She just listened intently, her intelligent eyes watching my face. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she simply said, "That sounds like it was an incredibly painful and difficult decision, but it also sounds like it was a necessary one for your own survival and well-being." That was it. No judgment, no guilt, no "but they're your family," just a clear-eyed acknowledgement of my reality. In that moment, I felt more seen and understood than I had in 32 years with the people who were supposed to know me best. I took her up to the cabin for the first time on a brilliant, crisp spring weekend. The last of the snow was melting, and the aspen trees were covered in the pale green haze of new buds. The air smelled of damp earth and rebirth. I'll admit I was nervous. I worried some psychic stain from that awful day would linger, that she would feel the bad energy. But as I watched her step out onto the deck and turn her face up to the warm sun, a genuine, unforced smile spreading across her face, I knew the ghosts had been exorcised for good. "Mark, this is absolutely breathtaking," she said, her voice filled with sincere awe. "Your grandfather was a very talented man." "He was," I said, a wave of pride washing over me. "He wanted it to be a place of peace." "Well," she said, turning and slipping her hand into mine, her fingers fitting perfectly between my own. "Mission accomplished." We spent the weekend hiking on trails that were just starting to clear, cooking together in the small kitchen, and talking for hours by the fire. We talked about our work, our dreams, our pests, but we never once talked about my parents or Eric. We didn't need to. The cabin was no longer defined by them. It was a blank slate, and we were beginning to write our own story on it. A few weeks after that trip, I got a call from David. "Dude, you are not going to believe the piece of gossip that just fell into my lap," he said, a note of dark amusement in his voice. "Lay it on me." I laughed. "So I was at a happy hour with some old work colleagues. Turns out, one of the new paralegals at my old firm is Jessica's cousin. Your brother's ex-girlfriend, Jessica." The ex hit me. "Ex-girlfriend? What happened?" "Total implosion, man," David said. "Apparently, once the reality set in that there was no free mountain house in her future. The fairy tale fell apart. The stress of having a baby with a guy who has no job, no money, and no prospects. It all came crashing down. They had a massive, blowout fight. She packed up her and her daughter's things and moved back to her parents' place in Arizona. Left Eric high and dry." I was silent for a moment, letting the news sink in. I didn't feel a shred of triumph or schadenfreude. I just felt a profound, hollow sadness for the mess they had all created. It was a predictable, inevitable outcome. "And Eric?" I finally asked, though I already knew the answer. "Where do you think?" David said with a wry chuckle. "He's 27 years old and back in his childhood bedroom. The cousin said your dad is still hounding him about finding a career path. And your mom is still cooking all his meals and doing his laundry. The kingdom of Enablandia is fully operational." Of course, nothing had changed for them. They were stuck in the same toxic, codependent loop. They had been willing to sacrifice their relationship with one son in a spectacularly failed attempt to prop up the other. And they had learned absolutely nothing in the process. Their world was shrinking, while mine was expanding. That weekend, I was up at the cabin by myself, doing some spring cleaning and maintenance, in the back of a dusty linen closet, tucked under a pile of old blankets. I found a small cardboard box I didn't remember seeing before. It was sealed with brittle, yellowed tape. Curious, I brought it into the main room and carefully cut it open. It was filled with some of my grandfather's personal effects, old black and white photos, a beautifully carved wooden bird, a few well-worn paperback westerns, and at the very